Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of my Summer of Chess. Following a couple of errors in judgment and finding that no audio was recorded or uploaded, I've decided to look into it and also decided to experiment with a little bit of background music. So with that being said, let us begin the match. This was against a fellow American around my skill level, with me on black and him on white. And so let us begin. He begins with King's Pawn opening, as many people do. And so I begin with my Knight to C6, my Van Geet opening. And so he moves Knight to F3, followed by my E5, Bishop to C4, and so I move Knight to F6. From this point, he moves Knight to G5, now has two aggressive pieces looking on this one pawn. What I should have done here is I'm not sure, but because of the timer, I decided to simply move my queen in an attempt to defend it. Obviously, that's not the case, as if he takes with either piece, the other piece could simply take my queen, and that would be foolish. And depending on if he took with the bishop or the knight, I would either be put in check, or I would have threat under my rook, and he chose to use his knight, meaning that I had to move my rook to G8. From this point, he attempts to put me in check. A rather terrible blunder here. Obviously, there's nothing protecting these pieces. Actually, on second thought, it wasn't quite a blunder because it opens up room for the rook. So I simply take it with my queen. He takes the rook. From there, I take my knight back, and this ends up working essentially to my a neutral favor. From there, he moves his queen to attack my king on H5, and obviously I would not want to block with this because he could simply take here. So instead of that, I move my queen to G6, and he accepts the trade, and I double stack my G file. From here, he begins to develop his knight on the C file, and so I do so on the F file, and he begins moving his D file pawn. I move to D4, and he castles. I move C6, he moves A4, I move D5, and he moves B4. So a lot of pawn movement going on here. I take with my pawn, he takes, and then I move my pawn up, hoping for him to take so I can take and give some protection as well as vision for this black square bishop. He does not accept the trade, however, and so I simply move my pawn forward, giving me that much needed vision. But however, he offers a trade of bishops. So nice of him. Unfortunately, I blunder here and decide to put the king in check on E2 with my knight, not realizing that this knight could easily simply take with no repercussion. Following that, I decide to accept the trade of bishops on the black square, and he takes with the rook. And so, with that pawn no longer being protected, I take with my knight, now putting me down by 2. He moves his pawn here. I move my knight to D2, threatening this rook, and he simply moves it over by 1. From there, I move my bishop out of the way to F5 so that I can get this rook out of the way and possibly castle. So when he moves pawn to F4, I castle, he takes, and I am prepared to throw away my bishop here, because if I can get him to take here, then it would no longer stop me from going here, putting him in check, and then taking the rook, which is an odd move for me. I don't know what was going through my mind, but that will put me down 1 point there. But it completely destroys his structure, saving the king. So I guess you could say it was a bit of a gambit. Following that, I move G5 pawn, and he moves his knight. So I threaten the knight. Sort of an empty threat, because obviously he could just take back. He moves his king, likely trying to threaten this rook, but it is protected by the pawn, so I don't necessarily worry about it. Instead, I take the time to move A5. He moves his knight to threaten this pawn right here, and it's a difficult situation, because if I move it up to avoid and threaten him, he can simply put my king in check on E7, and then immediately take it. And so instead, I throw away the pawn and simply take with my rook on H3. And he begins moving his pawn. I take another pawn, putting him in check, and he moves his king down, and so I begin to move my king to the side to stop this pawn from promoting. He moves it anyway, puts me in check, and I move to e8, blocking the pawn. He obviously can't go here and put me in check because then I simply take with my king. So I simply, after he moves his king, of course, I threaten his knight, and for whatever reason, possibly a blunder, while he's taking my pawn, I just take his knight, now putting me tying in a tie. He moves his king again, and so I simply take the pawn here. He moves his pawn here, so I begin moving my pawn up, and it looks like he really wants to get these pawns, but he is completely screwed as soon as he does this. Obviously, he can't go down here because of the pawn, and it will take him a very long time to get over and take that. So I simply move mine up. He tries to block it with his rook, so I simply move my pawns. He tries to put me in check, and I just move towards this pawn. He moves his pawn again. I move mine, f3. He moves his again, and then I move mine right here, threatening his rook. There's not a lot he can do. He tries to put me in check again, so I move to c8. Now he cannot put me in check again without losing his rook. So he moves, threatens this pawn for whatever reason, because obviously I can just take right here, so that's exactly what I do. And he also has plenty of room, so he can't stalemate. He moves his king to b5, and hindsight. So I promote on the f-file, putting him in check. He moves, and so I check him again. He moves back. I promote my next queen. So he moves to c4, check, and then he moves to b5. At this point, it is mate in 1, checkmate on b4. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.